Hollywood in the 50s, it could have been Scarsdale, it could have been anywhere, just a
Yeah,
little town, right?
yeah, no, absolutely.
Oh,
But it had to be. You see, there wasn't television. There wasn't a television implant that first put on the contract at Universal. There would be a little note put in the Bob Palmer's, he was the casting director. The following are invited to a party at MGM, a cocktail reception. And my name was always on it. Piper Laurie would end up on it once in a while. Everybody, my name was always on it. So I had, on the weekends, a lot of nice parties to go to. So did John Derrick at Columbia. So did R.J. Wagner at 20th. So that's how we all gathered. And we all enjoyed the fact that we were elite of the running of the profession. And I don't know how it happened. If you asked me how it happened, I can't tell you.
Right.
It was that's just the way it was.
Right. And not really financially elite in those days, but psychologically elite.
Exactly. It was. Listen, you know, when I got put on a contract, I was making $50 a week. By the time I played in my first lead, I was making $200. When that picture was over, they gave me $1,500 a week. $1,500 a week. My father didn't make $1,500 a year, and I'm making $1,500 a week. I buy a dinky car. You know, so my life was changing.
But you worked so hard. I mean, you learned all these physical things.
I
You don't
did
see people
everything.
learning all that stuff.
I did everything. I wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything I couldn't do, and there isn't anything I couldn't do. I learned how to fence, ride horseback, fight.
I know Jamie gave me all that footage of you. I mean, just doing all those handstands and
Yes.
things in the yard.
So I used to,
you were in great shape.
I enjoyed all of that. I enjoyed the physicalness of it. I trained myself as a kid in New York growing up. I said, one day I'm going to be in the movies and I'm going to better learn how to jump on the back of a chariot or a cab. But since there were no chariots in the city, I used cabs or trolley cars. So, you know, I kind of trained myself to be sitting here in front of you now, almost 50 years at it. Isn't that wonderful?
It's wonderful.
It's thrilling for me, you know.
I just wanted to ask you one question since you knew so much about Billy Wilder. Billy Wilder said about Frank Sinatra, what Sinatra has is beyond talent, yet he would never hire him for a film.
He was going to hire him for Some Like It Hot. Billy Wilder called me over to meet him at Harold Mirish's house one night before a screening. He said, Tony, I have a movie I want to make. It's two guys that must dress up like women to escape the mob, and I want to get Frank Sinatra to play one of the guys, you the other guy, and I'm not sure yet who the girl may be, maybe Mitzi Gaynor. I said, sounds good to me, Billy. Let me join up. A week later, he says to me, I'm not going to get Frank. I says, is there a reason? He said, well, he may be too much trouble. I didn't know what that meant, and it didn't make any difference to me. I said, well, do what you want. He said, but I saw Jack Lemmon in a movie I liked, and I don't think I'm going to use Mitzi because I think I could get Marilyn to play the featured role of a woman that didn't carry the movie. We all said, well, if you could do that, you could do everything. And he did. I mean, that's the way that picture was put together.
Right. Well, it's probably a good thing he didn't.
I did a movie with Frank called Kings Go Forth. So I had the privilege of working with Frank, and a very fine musician he is, not only as a singer, but as a movement. As an actor, he's very facile, very quick.
That's what Shirley MacLaine said. He could have been a great actor, but he never ever wanted to devote the time to it. That he
She's full of
devoted.
shit.
Really?
Next
Okay.
case.
Oh, that's good. Next, all right. Let me ask you a question. Were you ever privy to a lot of the jokes that they used to play on each other? A lot has been written about how Frank loved to play jokes on Harry Kernitz.
Yes.
About paintings.
Yes, yeah,
Do
they used to
you
do a
have
lot of.
one of those stories?
I do. I remember he did something to his car once at Charlie Feldman's house. There was a party. I think Kernitz drove up in a brown car and went home in a blue car. Some fucking thing. Excuse me, honey. You know, Frank would organize these little organizers. None of us were what do you call it? Not. What's the word I'm looking for? We were all privy to that with Frank. One never knew what was going to happen. He was funny, Frank. In Vegas, particularly, you know, when we went to the Sand. I was the driver for the mob. When Frank, we doing Kings Go Forth, Frank says on a Thursday, Bernie, we're driving up to Vegas. I said, but we're working tomorrow. He says, no, we're not working tomorrow. I said, no, we're not working tomorrow. So he had organized it somehow. He had this beautiful Cadillac with a shorn steel top. What was it called? The chrome? No. I don't know. It was a very special, beautiful Cadillac. So I would drive. I'd put on my gloves. I'd sit next to me. We'd drive up with Jack and Trotter, who was head of the entertainment at the hotel. So that's the way it went, you know?
Tell me about the inaugural gala and the weather that day, the snow in Washington.
Yes, it was really quite a day. It was quite an experience. I mean, well, it was just a thrilling experience to be part of history like that, you know? We didn't see much of the president or the president's wife. They went from party to party to party to party, you know? And see, can't really be sure, but
is it true that Frank really dedicated himself to that? I mean, was he really the one who made sure that Ethel Merman's show?
Frank always had a lot of input with people in the profession, particularly singers of that nature. You know, Frank was always the chairman of the board, if you want to call it that. So if I got a call from Frank says, I need you at this benefit, they would be at the benefit. If they were working elsewhere, he would, excuse them, but you wouldn't turn down. Not that you wouldn't turn down Frank, it was just that was really a prestigious thing to do.
See, what
Frank
you tell me about your knowing Joe Kennedy, now I know why you were in Palm Beach with
right.
them after the inauguration.
After
I
the
was thinking,
inauguration,
why is Tony at
and
the house?
before the inauguration, I'm sitting in the house with Joe Kennedy. I flew down with him. I was frightened of flying. He says, come on with me, kid. You're coming down with me. And we went down to the home in Palm Beach, is it? Or Palm, so, at their beach on their house on the beach. And I was sitting in the house, walking through it, went out to the beach, came in, and the phone rang, and Mr. Ambassador picked it up. I'm now going to paraphrase it, but in essence, I'm going to tell you what happened. He said, hello, son, how are you? Excellent. He said, I'm here with Tony. He says hello to you. Jack wants to say hello. I said, thanks a lot. He said, I'd love to hear it. He says he's going to read me the inauguration speech. This is Joe Kennedy. Puts it back to me. He says, go ahead, son, I'm ready. And he's listening to his son read him the inauguration speech that tomorrow or the next day or whenever is going to be read all over the world, right? And at one point, Kennedy, Joseph, puts his hand on the thing and says, and he holds the phone away from his ear. And I heard President Kennedy say, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
Yeah. Well, many people in Boston
God, I can't believe that.
who have worked on the
what?
that, people that I know in Boston who worked on the whole series on Kennedy told me that if Joe Kennedy hadn't had that stroke,
He what?
if Joe Kennedy hadn't had that stroke, that probably all of the problems that happened with GeneCon and everything never would have happened. That Joe Kennedy would have had the wisdom to tell them there are places you guys do not want to get into. And this came from a lot of people.
That could be, but that was never a. Trust me when I tell you, it was never a consideration. You know, Frank did everything he could for the inauguration, and once that was set, once that was done, he stepped back because he did not want to in any way infringe or embarrass or anything the President of the United States. That was it. They never had a fallout. The Kennedys did not decide they're not going to stay at his house but at Bob Hope's house. None of that occurred, you know? None of that.
So you think that, because Tina told me that, she told me that the Kennedys hurt her father in a way that.
Not at all. Tina is out of
They're
order.
kids, right. Mhm.
Tina is incorrect.
That's what Sonny King said. Sonny King said the worst thing about Frank's kids is that they're authorities on things that happened before they were born.
You got that right. You got that right.
That's
That was the last thing in the world. Last thing in the world that would have impressed Frank was having an intimate relationship with the President of the United States, or with anybody for that matter. You know, Frank loves the vibrations that are happening around him now. You know, when Elvis got out of the army, remember how he embraced Elvis? Why? Because he was jealous of Elvis and he wanted. No, he was part of that modern generation. Frank always was, right from the beginning. He would pick people out right early on. Picked me out right from day one.
right.
But he saw
always
me.
did the selecting, I know that.
Huh?
He always did the selecting.
Always.
Sammy told me he picked him. When first time
Yeah.
I saw him in 1940, he picked Sammy. Let me ask
And
you.
Rizzo, you know, Rizzo was a very important guy in this whole,
Joey,
you know,
right, absolutely.
and the
Let
way
me
he,
ask you just one
yeah.
last thing.
yes.
What's your spin on Peter Lawford? Do you think that what destroyed Peter Lawford was just the end of the whole Kennedy thing? Do you think he just? never
I don't
went
think
back?
so at all. Peter Lawford was a charming man, somewhat intelligent, somewhat shallow, not really interested in anything except hoping Peter Lawford could end up a major player, which he never ended up, which I think was more difficult for him to experience than anything, you see? And Frank and the boys gave him an opportunity to get on stage and kind of help improve his career-wise. But that's where Peter was. Peter had a snappy 3 or 4 years early in his career, very early. After that, nothing happened. You know, he'd run from one part to another. You remember those movies. And Peter was a very disillusioned and very bitter person. And I think that's what, that bitterness at an early age, you know, bitterness at an early age automatically turns into alcohol, substance abuse, all kinds of addictions, you know. And that's what I think happened with Peter. Not yet, Peter, on a one-to-one relationship, was most amusing. When there wasn't anybody to interfere with his advancement, it was perfect.
Was he insecure? The way
Very, very much so.
Yeah. That's what.
Very much so, and you know, imitated Frank in a lot of ways. The body movement, the body magic, you know. There was so many phrases. Not baby, what was it? Hey, booby, not booby. I don't even know. How's your bird? There was a whole slew of stuff that Peter Lawford did. It was incongruous to me to hear it coming out of this rather British gentleman who had this excellent accent, which we all wanted. And there he is saying, "Hey, where's your bitty bitty baby?" You know, I mean, if I could have talked like that, I could have been the Queen.
He was also on a certain level kind of unconscious, like to not know that the worst thing he could do would be to take Ava to dinner. Like,
Yeah, right,
how would
right.
you not know that? You know?
And the family was very supportive of him. He was in the family. You know, Pat is a lovely woman. That family, his son, Christopher, do you know the boy?
Yeah.
Oh, what a charming guy he is, you know, trying to make a career for himself. You know, it takes your breath away when you think about it. And I can't even understand how I know all of this stuff. I'm just too young to have been around.
It's very true. You and Sammy were the babies.
Yeah.
You and Sammy were babies compared
That's
to the
it.
rest of them. Yeah, because Frank, I realized yesterday with Milton Girl, Frank is almost as old as Milton. I mean, he's not as old, but he's more of that. He was around for such a long time
Yeah.
before any of you
Yeah.
came on the scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
He goes, and Dean too. Of course, they went way
Yeah,
back.
well, both those guys did. But both those guys, like all men in their 30s and 40s when the war ended, okay, didn't take care of themselves. Everybody smoked 4 packets of cigarettes a day, drank a quart, a pint, or whatever you want, or whatever, ate the worst food in the world, were so unhappy. There was such a stress and a strain going on that all the leading men from the 40s all died in their 40s and 50s.
Sure, look at
Tyrone
Bogart.
Power,
Look at Bogart.
Gary Cooper, Bogart, Clark Gable, 59 when he died. Whole slew of, Cary Grant was the only one that made it into the 80s. Milton made it into the 80s only because he never balabused like the others, but Frank was a balabus, you know. Frank did a lot of booze, so did Dean, and that's what did them all. And I thought that was so cool to take an old-fashioned glass with some ice, pour Jack Daniels in. I'd watch the guys do it. Each one had his own bottle, and we put it down on the table. Toast each other. I'd watch through the corner of my eye, see how they would drink it. I wish I had a place I could spill it because I couldn't drink. But after 1.5 of it, they would lift me out of the chair, frozen, and Jilly would get me to my room, and I'd wake up the next morning in bed sitting like this.
Well, you know what Sammy told me once? He said that Frank would call him up and he'd say, Smokey, come on over, we're having a party, and bring your sunglasses because you're going to be here when the sun comes up. And that was the whole thing. And Sammy said, and you'd have to be there. Because
well, yeah, Sammy was funny.
Sonny King said,
What I saw Sammy with Peter Falk. Oh, I don't know where this was, and they were standing alongside each other, and I was standing next to Blake Edwards. I said to Blake, I says, do you realize that between those two guys, there were only 2 eyes? It was a.
they were great to Sammy. I mean,
Oh, Sammy, are you kidding? Sammy had the best time in the world. Listen, he was. Sammy had the best time in the world. I mean, everybody, we all loved him so much, you know. We assumed the guilt of what this country had done to our black brothers, you know. And Sammy would say to us, stop being so nice to me. It's all right. I don't need a girl. I'm okay. Do something about my color, but leave me alone.
And he was a tough guy.
Who, Sammy?
Yeah.
Very tough.
I talked to guys in Atlantic City who told me when he first went to Atlantic City, he used to hit on all mobsters' girlfriends who would come down from South Philly.
Yeah, well, he was tough.
By the name of Joey Stevens, he said, you know, I'd have to go up to him and I'd have to say, Sammy, you're in no man's land, my man. And he'd just keep going. I mean, he had absolutely no fear.
He was an excellent athlete, you know. He was perfectly balanced. He was a tiny man, but, you know, he's an exceptional gift. Had he been any bigger, I don't think he would have been an entertainer. He'd have been a boxer or he'd have found another way. But the fact that he was so petite made it possible for him to learn to dance quickly and sing, so.
All right, we're just winding to the close. This is just for my own reference on this, for my own accuracy.
Yes.
Do you believe that the people behind Frank Sinatra had anything to do with his getting the role From Here to Eternity?
No.
You don't. Do you think that Ava was the person?
No.
Okay, so
Harry Cohn was.
But Eli Wallach told me that
Eli Wallach doesn't know what he's talking about.
So you tell me.
I'm going to tell you what happened.
Okay.
Harry Cohn was a friend of mine who I knew for years. And Harry Cohn wanted me to be on the contract to Columbia because he wanted to do a picture called Joseph and His Brothers. And he wanted me to play Joseph. But I was on the contract to Universal. So he and Lou Wasserman were trying to get my contract split between Universal and Columbia. So that's where Harry's position was. And that's how I knew Harry. And I knew the kind of a man he was. Brilliant, very smart filmmaker. Every year during his reign, of the 30 movies he made, there was always 2 or 3 that was up for some Academy Awards. That's how clever he was. He was able to design certain movies for that. He was very, very knowledgeable in that. And when From Here to Eternity came along, there was a lot of speculation, not so much on that part, Maggio, but on the rest of it. He wasn't sure he wanted the Monte Clift, Monty Clift was always already being troublesome. Monty was having trouble with his sexual presence and what he was, and was drinking a lot. So that was a very difficult position for him to make. Burt Lancaster, he was sure of. He wasn't sure of, what, Carr was her name?
Deborah
What?
Carr.
Wasn't sure of Deborah Carr. He didn't want that British sound. He wanted a good American sound. He was, he balanced that picture very, very delicately. And finally, I know from what I heard that it had come down to 2 or 3 guys, and the only name I heard was Frank Sinatra. Had nothing to do with Ava. Ava's career at Warner Brothers was at MGM was over. Had nothing to do with Harry Cohn, and Harry Cohn wasn't going to do a beau geste for anybody. Believe me, Harry Cohn was a very solid, very, very important businessman in that thing. And if that picture ended up with Frank Sinatra, it ended up because Harry Cohn wanted him, and not because anybody said, well, we'll twist your arm a little bit.
Right, not because Johnny.
Well, Harry Cohn, what could anybody give him
Trouble.
for that part of Maggio for Frank Sinatra? What could he get from anybody? He could get the ownership of MGM. There wasn't anybody in town then that was as important as Harry Cohn in putting these pictures together.
Right.
What player was?
Right. No, I was just, so much has been written about the fact that that it wasn't anything really dramatic. It was just that Frank had a lot of power behind him.
Well,
and
you've got to
Harry
remember
Cohn
something
figured-
happened before then. I don't know if you know this. Frank Sinatra was signed to do From Here to Eternity.
On the waterfront.
On the waterfront, signed.
I know that.
Okay? He got in belly of Big Iron Bird, flying from LA to New York City, Constellation. And in the middle of the flight, Marlon Brando became available. And in the middle of the flight, when that plane landed, somebody had to tell Frank Sinatra he was not going to be in that movie. Now, if that isn't a ball buster, nothing is.
Right.
It gives you a little insight to Frank.
Exactly.
Imagine taking that kind of news.
Exactly.
Imagine being given that news by, I don't know, some secretary. Oh, by the way, here's a little memo. You are not playing the part.
I was also told that Harry Cohn was a very nasty man.
He
And I
was.
know he was really nasty.
He wasn't nasty. He was.
When you were young, I
He
know
was, well, he loved me because I was on the contract. I was a member of the elite, so it wasn't like I was looking for a job. Half of us always used to hang up in his office. He just loved being around young guys and
Right.
fellas doing it to girls. He loved to hear all about the experiences.
Oh,
I liked Harry.
I know. Janet said he was very mean to you.
To
She said
who?
Janet Lee said that she was doing a film at Columbia, and Harry Cohn used to just be so mean. He'd say to Tony, she said, he'd say to Tony, "What are you doing? You're keeping her up too late at night." She's not looking good. She said he was a mean man. I don't know. Maybe that
Well,
was her perception. She said
I
he
don't
was
want to
very
test the
cruel.
veracity of that story,
I know.
so I'll just keep my mouth shut.
No, that's great. Thank you very much.
I thank you.
Very good.